Okay, I think we'll probably get started so that those others that can join us as I go through our introduction can join in. So my name's Phil Newman. I run marketing for Adapttech internationally, and delighted to say that I'm joined by Teri Chou of Modus Health today and Cassandra Delgado of Prosthetic Orthotic Associates. So welcome, Teri, and welcome, Cassandra.
Hello.
Great to see you. So Teri, you're joining one of our webinars for the first time, so welcome. Could you maybe just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do at Modus Health?
Absolutely. So some of you may remember me from years back when I was a bit more active in the prosthetic community back when I was at OrthoCare as a research scientist. Over the years, Modus Health split out from OrthoCare to focus on activity monitoring in all kinds of patient populations, with still a desire to improve outcomes in prosthetics. I became CEO of the company in 2017, and our main focus is really to improve the ease of use of our device for clinicians, knowing that we've already mastered, superior accuracy, but we now need to then, make it so that you all can use it easier to get the information you need.
Great, Teri. Well, welcome. Obviously, we're going to be going into a bit of depth about what you're doing now at Modus. But for those of you that don't know Cassandra, Cass, would you mind just explaining a little bit about your background as well?
Sure, yeah. My name is Cassandra Delgado. I am a CPO. I practice up in Middletown, New York, and I am one of the clinical directors that oversees all of our lower limb prosthetic and orthotic care for the practice. I like to say that I'm in the trenches with you guys. I see patients in and out. I saw a patient right before this. I'm going to see a patient right after this, right? So truly outcomes are something that I deal with day to day. And so I work with Adapttech. I've had the unique opportunity to get to trial all of the new technology that they've had come out. So yeah, I'm involved in the community, just a regular old CPO, but I enjoy sharing education and just creating a more collaborative field for us in prosthetics and orthotics.
Great, Cass. Well, I think obviously, as you've identified, we're moving into the subject matter of outcomes. So format's going to change slightly from our usual approach. So we're going to be going through two short presentations, and I'd encourage everybody, if you can, please, to add your questions as we go along via the chat, which is available in the Zoom window, and we'll address your questions at the end. So, Teri, if you're ready to go, we'll start off with your presentation about clinical data and outcomes, if that's okay.
Absolutely. All right. So, hello. Thank you all for joining. Today, I am focusing on a case study where a stopwatch was used to track recovery following an amputation. So stopwatch is often used in research, and this was one of the first times stopwatch was used in clinical care to track recovery and improvements over time. Next slide. Okay. A little more on me. I got my doctorate in bioengineering at the University of Utah, and I've had many roles, but research and science has been my background, and I've sort of picked up the other roles needed to lead Modus. And yeah, we've had lots of great up and downs, but I do have my proudest moment that I added to the slide, and that is leading Modus past a board vote to shut down in 2016 and building it up again stronger than ever to profitability just last year. So pretty wonderful to have hit that plateau and now move onward from it. So our focus is making stopwatch easier to use in our primary markets, and our primary markets are academic research, clinical trials, and clinical care. Okay, next slide. So, the background for doing this case study was that at this time, the Veteran Affairs recently began reimbursement for community activity monitoring of lower limb prosthetic users. And so, we wanted to start focusing on, how clinicians could start using it, to better understand both prosthetic use and mobility of veterans, to see if it could improve clinical care. Next slide. This case study focuses on a 53-year-old veteran who had suffered a severe orthopedic trauma. He was in an accident. It was a transfemoral amputation. He also experienced a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. And this case study follows this patient for 8 weeks in acute inpatient rehabilitation care. This patient was fitted with a prosthetic after 4 weeks, and the type of prosthetic was a hydraulic swing and stance control knee with a multi-axial foot. Next slide. Okay. At the beginning, this patient was estimated to have the potential to be a K3, functional ambulator. And then we used a stepwatch to track, and for those who don't know, a stepwatch is worn on the prosthesis and it's used to track walking. So we used stepwatch to track rehabilitation, and that was tracking not only daily steps, but also cadence and a lot of other metrics around walking. And it was placed on the patient's first outpatient physical therapy visit. Next slide. So the type of metrics stepwatch measures, it does an overall functional level, or K level. We have a peak performance index that is looking at the, it's looking at the patient's ability to perform at higher intensities. Daily steps, average cadence, cadence variability, daily distance, and stride time. For this presentation, to keep it, in the right time budget we have, we're just going to focus on 3 metrics. Okay, next slide. So here's what happened over those 7 to 8 weeks. As the patient was undergoing rehabilitation, you saw some steady improvement from the first week all the way through week 3, and then a sharp decline at 6 weeks. And that was kind of surprising, given that the physical therapy metrics, such as gait speed and other outcomes in the clinic, were showing steady improvement over those 6 weeks. Next slide. Same with distance walked. Distance walks does correlate highly with daily steps, and again showing a plateau and drop along with the daily steps from the previous slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, but interestingly, cadence did not experience the same drop that daily steps and distance experienced. And what I find so interesting about cadence is that is a little more of a characteristic of how someone walks, as opposed to how much someone chooses to do at home. So when you're walking at home and you're measuring their walking, there's the ability of what you're able to do, and then there's what you choose to do. So it was interesting that cadence remained stable, and that also made sense that the physical therapy metrics were also stable. Okay, next slide. So with this new information that the clinical team had never had before, they got together and began discussing, what would explain that these 2 metrics had this sudden drop, but that the physical therapy metrics were remaining stable and improving in some cases. Because walking at home was declining, all the other gait metrics were looking good. Ultimately, the data allowed the clinicians to come up with some very clear questions to ask the patient, asking them on these weeks, what happened, what was causing the sudden drop in walking. That discussion uncovered that the patient was actually experiencing severe depression. Some of these bullet points are quotes from what the patient was feeling, and that led to a new treatment plan that otherwise would not have taken place. Next slide. So this was really the first time the clinicians were aware of the patient's depressive symptoms. It was not something the patient was volunteering. It alerted the clinical team to include a mental health aspect of this patient's recovery. And what's really profound is that because they were able to get this patient the help that the patient needed, you could then begin to see a steady improvement. So next slide. So here is now the continuation of tracking what happened with the patient. So week 6 was the biggest low. By week 7, the patient was receiving mental health care. And it's really beautiful that you can begin to see the steady, improvement of choosing to do more physical activity at home and continuing that improvement trajectory. Next slide. Okay, same with distance walked. You're seeing even a larger improvement by week 13. Next slide. And then cadence, which was the more stable measure that was less reactive to the depressive symptoms. Even those began, exceeding what was previously achieved by week 13. Next slide. So in conclusion, I thought it was really interesting to see that activity monitoring can provide unique insights into a patient's health and lifestyle that are not, readily clear from outcome measures performed in the clinic. It can show how, clinical care is impacting the patient's walking at home, which is ultimately what we're all trying to achieve. We're trying to improve quality of life in the patient's home when they're away from the clinic. And it also showed just in general how activity monitoring could improve patient care. Okay, next slide. All right, so this was a team at the time that was managing the patient and using stepwatch. And I just wanted to have their picture to, as a way to remember them for all their hard work. And they continue to use stepwatch when they're interested in learning about patient mobility and from understanding walking in clinical trials. So that is it. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions.
Great, Teri. Thank you. Yeah, well, I've got one question for you before we go into Cass's presentation. So what is the difference between, we're all wearing our various bands around our wrists these days. What's the difference between what you guys are doing and, for example, a Fitbit?
Absolutely. So that's asked a lot. And Dr. Jason Highsmith did a really interesting counterpoint on that question that got published in The Edge. And I'm happy to send that to anyone who's interested. But in that, he really delved into the details of the literature around Fitbit and stepwatch. And what it showed was that Fitbit is just really highly unreliable in measuring walking in people ambulating with the prosthesis. So slow walking has a huge impact on Fitbit's accuracy, whereas stepwatch accuracy is very stable. There was a study that had a % of patients where Fitbit measured 0 of their steps during continuous walking, which is problematic. But the thing that makes it inappropriate is you don't know when you put it on your patient whether it's going to count 0 of their steps, 30% of their steps, 40, 50, or maybe all of them. And that's where it becomes tricky, is that it works differently on each individual. For you and me, for tracking just general, for general watching of our fitness, I think it's good enough, just as giving you a little indicator of what you're doing if you're a able-bodied individual. But in healthcare, it's much better to have a proven medical device for the purpose that you're trying to use it for, which is walking.
Great, Teri. Thank you. Well, I guess we'll come back to some other questions as well when we get into the second part of our session. So thanks very much for your slides. And lovely to see that obviously you helped a patient at a completely different level to the way you expected to do so in the first place, which is great.
Thank you.
Awesome. So Cassandra, let's hand over to you now, and perhaps you can give us your perspective on your experiences both in the clinic with the Insight system, as we know you've been working with in the past, and perhaps some of the other work you're doing in other forms of orthotics and prosthetics.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I've been teaming up with Adapttech for a little bit now, and I'm sure maybe some of you might have seen me on other webinars that we've done monthly. But at this point, we're going to take a little bit different perspective and just look at outcomes, right? We hear outcomes talked all the time in our field and about how important they are. But I think sometimes we're a little closed off in how we share them from practice to practice, right? And so I think it's important to just promote our field, encourage our patients to do better from a more global perspective, not just from what is my little clinic doing in my corner of the world, and just share some of the knowledge. So we could go to the next slide. We'll get started here. And so really, what do outcomes impact? It's 4 major things, right? Your payer source. Here in the United States, we have a very strict and challenging time with insurance companies. It's very, very difficult for us to get reimbursed for what we do. And so making sure that you have good data to prove to your insurance companies and your payer sources that you deserve to get paid for your work is important. It's also important for your patient that they get good outcomes. It's important for your network, your PTs, your OTs, the doctors giving you referrals, that the patients have good outcomes, and your staff. How are your staff doing? Have you checked in with them? How are their outcomes going? So we'll go on to the next slide and we'll touch on each of these different areas. So when it comes to the payer, we had one the other day say, he's lucky I'm approving this. And this was for a patient that got hurt on the job. And we're like, what do you mean he's lucky? Like, you should be covering this. This should be a no questions asked situation. So it's just challenging, right? That's just showing how challenging it is to us every day. We fight, right? And so one of the things that I've been telling our clinicians is saying one thing in our note is one thing, but proving it is another. And so we've really tried to focus on giving hard data where I can say all day, yeah, the patient shrunk in volume, or yeah, the patient's socket isn't comfortable, but having data to prove that just strengthens our argument all that much more. So giving them data that they cannot refute, that is just undeniably very, very obvious, spelling it out, doing it very simply, I think is really, really helpful. So we'll just quickly review 3 technologies that we use in our practice to help improve with our outcomes for a payer source. So on the next slide, you see we've got the Adapttech Insight system that I've been using. This gives real-time feedback for any pressures that are in the socket. This has helped us give justification for sockets that need adjustment, and we've tried to adjust them multiple times, but the limb has still changed so significantly that we can't get them into a good spot with their current socket. So we need a socket replacement. We've also used it to help justify different componentry. So let's say, for example, a torsion unit. We can have someone walk and make turns and corners and tight areas and show that their socket pressures are reduced when they have a torsion unit on compared to when they have it off. So using this has definitely been helpful for, showing our patients, but also educating our payer sources that what we are asking for indeed is necessary. Next slide. And then what's really great from the Insight system is that you can send a report out. You can export this as a PDF, scan it into the patient's chart, and send it with that insurance claim. It's been very, very easy to do that. And so this has been an excellent part of it, where it's a great visual. They can visually see differences, changes, high pressures, low pressures. Next slide. Another technology we're using is the comb scanning app. One time we had an insurance company ask us to provide measurements for a patient's limb from every single appointment. They wanted a measurement from the initial evaluation, from the casting appointment, from the first check socket fitting, from the second check socket fitting, to the delivery at every appointment. And we're like, we don't take measurements at every single appointment, right? We take them at the consultation, or we'll take them at the casting, but rarely am I taking new measurements again at my second check socket fitting, right? Unless I think they've had a drastic change. And so we use the comb scanning app now because of that situation to scan patients' limbs every time they come in. And so we have a record of what their limb was, what it is today, what it was 2 weeks ago. It takes less than 30 seconds to do. It's built into an iPhone, and so we very easily can use that to show and track changes over time. And it's just like saying, hey, how are you doing? And while you're saying that in the clinic, you're taking a quick scan of their limb. And so that's been great when we do need to go back and reference or show comparisons. We can overlay those in our CAD system and show differences. So that's been really, really helpful for us. Next slide. And then the final one is the GWalk system. It's a belt that essentially goes around the waist, and it helps to measure cadence, step length, stride, propulsion, pelvic asymmetries. It's very easy to use. We help use this to definitely show that our K3s can do variable cadence, and that they are indicated for that higher level of technology. On the next slide, you'll see a report that I ran to help actually with our justification for getting a C-brace approved. The walk analysis report showed that she had a very poor quality walk. with an AFO. You can see that in red. Next, the CAFO is a little bit yellow, so that's a little bit of an improvement. And then with the C-brace, her quality of walk was significantly improved. And so this just helped with our appeal for the denial that we had gotten, even though they approved it at the get-go. When they went to pay on the claim, they denied it. Surprise. So this helped to give even further justification that we were eventually successful to get paid for. Next slide. In practicality, every technology for a practice, you have to ask yourself, is it worth it to your practice? Is it worth it to your patients? Is it worth the time you put into it? And each of those categories are very important, right? You want to embrace technology that you know can be helpful and beneficial for your clinic. And really thinking about each of these are very important aspects of diving in and continuing on with your outcome measures, because outcome measures aren't going to stop. They're not going to stop asking for more data. They're not going to stop asking for more support. And so getting involved and embracing them and finding your resident who's really tech savvy, right, to get this up and going is always a good idea. All right, next slide, and we're going to switch to talking about the patient. So having great outcomes with your patient, it's important that we maintain these really great relationships. And on the next slide, you can see one of those ways that we do that is giving them the right resources. I used to tell parents, go read what you want to read on the internet, come back and ask me any questions you might have. And then I realized I need to point them to good sources, right? I need to point them to the right areas to read. So just a few: Amplitude magazine for every new patient that comes in, the Starband Kids for any children that wear the cranial remolding orthoses, the Amputee Coalition, right? Local and online support groups. All of these are good avenues to point those patients to and get them to the right resources so that they can have great outcomes. On the next slide, I also like to give patients a really good understanding of their insurance. It's very important for them to understand our complicated system to some extent, so that when problems or if problems do come up, we've already explained anything to them. They're on our side, right? We're working together as a team to get this approved. We've had a lot of great success with patients writing their own appeal letters also to insurance companies to verify that, yes, I do want this service. Yes, I want to walk. And it just really helps to put you and the patient on the same team and let them know that you are in their corner. You are here fighting for them and for what their mobility needs are. So giving them a basic understanding, I think, has been very, very helpful for my patients. Next slide. Okay, and then learning styles. This is something that I don't think we talk enough about. When I'm in an appointment with a patient, I'm talking to them, right? And I'm explaining all their instructions and I give them a little handout. But most of people, actually more than 65% of people, are visual learners. That's why we have a slideshow with pictures and PowerPoints, right? Because we don't just listen, we also need to look at things and see things. So visual learners, knowing what type of learning style your patient is important. A visual learner, for those people, you probably want to give some guidebooks, some examples, show them samples in your office. For verbal learners, oftentimes I will see these people want to repeat questions back to me or repeat instructions back. So if I have told them how to, clean their liner, then at the end of their appointment, they might say, okay, I'm going to take my liner off. I'm going to reflect it inside out. I'm going to rinse it under the sink. And sometimes when I've had patients do this, I'm like, why are they doing this? I just told them everything, but that's their learning style, right? It's confirming what they've heard. And so on the next slide, we'll see two other learning styles. One of them is mathematical, logistical. These are the learners that love data. They want to know their limb measurements every time. They want to know all the specs to the foot that you're recommending. And that's how they are able to process their care very well. And it helps just to make sense in their mind. And then others are social learners. They do really great with peer mentors. They're always chatting with the front office desk staff. And so putting them in an environment where they can chat with other people and learn through a social area is really, really beneficial for these patients. So I'm not asking you to analyze all of your patients and have them fill out a survey of what kind of learner they are, but I think it's important to be mindful of how they learn so that they can have the best outcomes, right? So that they clean their prosthesis properly, so that they gradually get used to any new device in the proper way can help improve their outcomes. Next slide, please. And then sometimes patients have difficulty finding the words, right? They have a hard time expressing what they're feeling, especially when they're a newer patient. So one of the forms we have at our office is called the McGann feedback form, and it's based off a very simple questionnaire. And each patient we will do this on, we'll ask them to rate it as a red, yellow, or green. Again, that's a very easy scale we all kind of know. So let's say the weight of the prosthesis, does that feel like it's a red, yellow, or green for you? And so anything that's green during the appointment, we continue to monitor. Anything that's yellow, we make a plan to address, and anything that's red leads the appointment to address today and create a solution for that problem today. So this really helps to guide some of our appointment times. Especially when patients have a hard time saying, I don't know, everything is just wrong. And you're like, okay, what's wrong, right? This kind of helps to bring them down. And this actually helps our residents get really good experience on how to interview a patient as well. So sometimes we'll have our residents go in first and go through this form and get that information so that we can improve the patient's outcome measures. Next slide. And getting the patient involved, especially with vacuum. When you use vacuum on a lower limb prosthetic patient, there are 3 requirements in the United States for providing vacuum. The patient has to have one of those 3. It can be excessive perspiration, a history of wounds, or a history of significant volume fluctuation. So most of our patients have volume fluctuation, right? They're big in the morning, then shrink to the end of the day, and they're adding socks and all of these things. So vacuum can help stabilize that. So we've gotten our patients involved to do limb tracking throughout the course of the day. We'll have them measure their leg, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, try to go about it the same time of day. And it helps them understand their fluctuation of their limb. It helps them recognize that their limb does change throughout the day. And then it also helps us give the insurance documentation. So we train the patient how to measure it. We go through it. We make sure that they can do it properly. And then they do it every day for about a week or 2 until we see them again. And then we have this data that shows that we do indeed have volume differences, because I can't go home with them and measure their leg every day, right? To show changes in volume from the morning to the afternoon. So actually patients love doing this, especially new patients. They're always very curious. They'll say, hey, Cass, my leg was at 45. Now it's at 44.3. I'm like, all right, great. Keep wearing your shrinker, right? So it's a really good task to give them to do, especially when they're still healing from their amputation. Next slide, please. And then outcomes for your network. The really big thing is having your go-tos. Do you have that good physiatrist that you can go to and talk and collaborate with on a patient? Do you have good OT, good PT, good social work, good mental health, good volunteer sources, right? Each of these are very important to have people in your corner that are going to help with this documentation of these outcomes. Does your local OT know how to do a dash or a quick dash if you have a patient with upper extremity involvement? Does your PT know through and through how to do a tug test or do an AMP Pro? Do they need to be educated? Do you need to help host an in-service of some type to make them feel more comfortable doing these types of tests? I had a patient go to his physical therapist, and I asked the physical therapist to do an AMP Pro test on him, and they said, no, I've never done that. And I said, okay, this is how you do it. And they say, no, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, so we found another physical therapist that's closer and works more with prosthetic users. So sometimes it's just educating people or pointing patients to those close referral sources that your patients will get great care at. The bottom one, volunteer sources. This is really important. We have a lot of interns that come through our practice. We always have intern projects, right? And oftentimes those are associated with doing outcome measures in our practice or improving our clinic workflow. So having a good high school class that has rotations that they do. A lot of our high schools here in New York have rotations for the students where they can come and see things for a semester long and learn. So we're always looking to have kids come in and use them to our benefit. So it's very helpful to have those extra set of hands sometimes. All right, next slide. And then your staff, right? One more slide over. So we've had staff members that where we really want to grow them and encourage them to grow into their role. And so asking some of our clinical assistants, hey, do you want to learn how to laminate? Hey, do you want to learn how to perform this test on a patient? Hey, do you want to learn how to cast, right? And obviously under the supervision and their scope of practice, but encouraging them to learn new things or taking on projects. Hey, do you want to take lead on the comb scanning app? One of our residents took took lead on that and really has embraced it and really helped to implement it into our practice. So using your people efficiently and growing them in a way that you know that they can succeed and thrive, I think is very important and very helpful, right, to getting these outcome measures done day in, day out. And then one more slide over. We also have realized that it's been very hard with COVID and the pandemic and everything to have a consistent workflow. We've had lots of interruptions with patients delaying their care or avoiding coming in. Once they come in, they're in a dire situation. Doctors' offices are slammed, so they're having a very difficult time getting in to even see their doctor due to COVID concerns and just everyone being squeezed very, very tightly. And so it's hard to get that documentation then from the doctor's offices. And then our field has had a tough time too, right? Our sales reps were laid off for a while. We've had delays in supplies and shipping. Our clinicians, being concerned, am I going to get sick when I see patients at work? Am I going to lose my job? Is the clinic okay? How can I keep the office safe? And so all of these things have really impacted the past year and a half. And I think it's important to reflect on these and realize that these do impact our outcome measures that we take on our patients, because it's not the typical flow of work that we've been used to for years, right? So on the next slide, just one of the things that as part of leadership that I like to mention too is making sure that we have a good work environment, that we make it as safe as possible, that we listen to health concerns and we take action, and then maintaining your own mental health, right? My resident here at the practice knows exactly if I'm stressed out or not, right? And so making sure that I take a minute to step back and say, hey, how am I doing? Am I projecting stress out to the rest of the company? And is it something that is a necessary stress, or is it unnecessary? And really just taking a minute to look at my actions also in the workplace. And one of the things that I like to do now during lunch is I'll take a walk outside during lunch and I'll dictate my notes. And that just kind of helps me get things done while also getting a little bit of exercise in, and just keeping up your drive and your optimism is very important for your staff during this time, and for your patients. Your patients know when you're burnt out. They can sense it, they can feel it. And so helping to minimize that by checking in every once in a while, I think is very, very important. Taking those days off work when you need to. And one more slide over. So one of the things that we are doing in our office is mindfulness-based stress reduction. The owner of the company has provided this as an opportunity for each of our staff members to work on how they view stress and ways that we can help reduce that stress by looking at our mindset. And stresses are going to come, and it's how we react to them really is how our stress levels can vary. So we're starting implementing this for our team to help improve their outcomes, right? Because when you come to work and you can minimize your stress, then you're going to be excited about new technology. You're going to be looking forward to continuing to move forward and be a pioneer in the field. And so it's all intertwined, right? It's all intertwined. So yeah, that's what I've got today. Do we have one more slide? Or I think that might have been my last one. Yeah. All right. So.
Right, Cass, thank you. Yeah, well, obviously covered a lot of subjects there. So, of course, with regards to what's been happening with COVID and the way that obviously you're looking at outcomes and remote management and so on, do you feel that COVID is transitioning us into a different model now between the clinic and working with people remotely? Have you found that at all in your practice?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Normally, follow-ups that we would have scheduled, we're pushing those out a little bit more, saying, hey, call us if you really need us. Like, maybe we would normally do a 2-week follow-up, but we might say now, hey, if you need to come out, then come to us, especially for those at-risk patient populations that are very scared to come to the appointment in the first place. And so we have been switching to more telehealth. We'll video chat with them, we'll call them that way. But also, the saying no news is good news, that's not always the case. That's oftentimes not the case in our field. And it's needing to check in and see them in a different way. So it's hugely impacted our practice in so many ways. Yeah.
Great. Well, let's just open up the floor to any questions. So please feel free, everybody, to pose any questions that you may have via the chat, which is in the bottom of your screen. So Teri, maybe we could just move to you and just ask the question about relying on patients for self-reporting as opposed to wearing a device or carrying some other form of outcome measurement tool. What's your view on that in terms of patient self-reporting?
There, can you hear me?
We got you. Yeah.
Gotcha, great. So there's been quite a few studies trying to understand the accuracy of patient self-report. I think self-report is incredibly important because you'll always learn something about the patient you couldn't otherwise. However, when trying to grasp their physical activity levels at home, there was a study back, as early as 2007 that looked into this, and then some more recent ones. Honestly, it's a coin flip as to how good they are. So over half of them will at least let you know they're improving when they're actually improving. Others will actually say they're improving when they're declining. It can be that poor. The ones that are, and it's impossible to know which side of the coin your patient's going to be on. So while you can learn something incredibly useful, and patient report should always be, I think, part of the assessment, you absolutely need an objective way to understand, there are some dips and declines and improvements in the real world because they just do not track. And that's okay. I use Stepwatch too in all my testing, and it is really difficult to summarize your walking over a week. Usually you'll have a one day that really stands out, and that will color how you think you did the entire week, or one really bad day, and that bad day colors how you did on all the other days, right, when you're trying to describe it. And so it's not their fault, but it's why I do what I do. I deeply believe in having that objective information.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cass, when you are in the clinic, how often are you taking outcome measures? I mean, what's the sort of regularity that you're working to on that?
Yeah, great question. Every day is kind of different, or every appointment, I should say, is a little different, right? Depending on what the patient needs, right? So when we have a cranial remolding orthosis come in, we're not interviewing the baby, right? We're interviewing the patient or the parent and asking them. But then if we have a brand new prosthetic patient, that's a different set of outcome measures. So it truly depends on the appointment type and visit, but I would say very, very often. I would say probably maybe about 80% of the time I am taking some type of objective measure on the patient, whether it is measurements, whether it's doing a quick dash or a tug or an AMP Pro or the McGann feedback form, but I'm not the one always doing it, right? We've got great clinical assistants, we've got great residents that we train intentionally so that we can get this data, right? Because I'm running from patient to patient, right? I'm seeing, a lot of patients throughout the course of a day. And so if I can have one of our other care extenders, one of our other staff members help to make that an easy part of our practice and it just goes straight into our workflow. That's why we're able to get them done so often, is because we have that extra help. So I would greatly encourage you all to have that extra help, or look at getting into a resident or a student. There's lots of college programs that students need rotation hours or things like that, and so it's been very beneficial to use them in that way so that this is practical, right? Because if it was just me by myself, I would have a hard time doing all of these outcomes in a regular scheduled appointment visit. So using a team is important.
Yeah, great. And I guess automation is going to become a big part of the way that you can extend that. And we kind of call it the nudge factor in some cases. How are you going to help somebody to remember to stand up and walk around and that type of thing, which obviously is going to improve those outcomes and help payers as well as other healthcare providers. So talking of which, Teri, is Stepwatch available as part of a reimbursement package?
So it is available within the Veteran Affairs facility. So if you are working with a veteran, there is a path for reimbursement for Stepwatch. It's I believe the L5999 code. So not a super special code, but it is there, and there is language around how to get reimbursed for that. People can reach out if they would like to know more details on it. With other insurance, I think it's a little bit variable. So I don't think it's uniform. So I'd love to honestly learn more about people's experiences with that. So
yeah, and well, just then, obviously, Cassie, you're very involved in the reimbursement process. So, I mean, are you finding now that insurers are becoming more outcomes focused, or is it still something that's new to some of the departments that you end up speaking with?
Oh, without a doubt. Sometimes they will ask questions that have been answered in our clinical notes. And they say, but it's not in a graph. And I'm like, I've never asked for it in a graph, but I can put it in a graph, right? And so it's very, very challenging because there's no set instructions oftentimes, especially in the United States. There's no, it's looking for a reason to deny rather than looking for reasons to approve, right? It's definitely not on the patient's side, unfortunately. And so absolutely, there are struggles, appeals, day in, day out, that we're just fighting for it. And so any additional documentation that we give outside of a note speaks volumes to them because they can't argue with it. If it's there, it's there. And so that's been where we've really kind of leaned into getting those outcome measures to them and really stressing the importance of them, because if not, you don't really have, you have your word, which we wish would be enough, but if we've got something to prove it, then that just backs you up. Right?
Yeah. And is that helping now with appeals when you're trying to get through, like you said, that your first patient you referred to there was kind of lucky, to get reimbursed. So is that helping you now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's just more data, right? And so oftentimes we'll submit a claim just like we normally have submitted a claim, my note, the prescription, the doctor's note, and tell them why we need what we need. And then now, there's always hoops to jump through. And so whenever we do write those appeal letters, we have additional documentation that says, hey, look, they can vary their cadence. Hey, look, they can do stairs. Hey, they are doing X, Y, and Z. Here's also a letter from the patient expressing that they're able to do X, Y, and Z now with their prosthesis. So doing a lot of patients involved with their care, and those outcome measures really pack a punch when it comes to putting those denial packets together for them. Yeah.
It sounds, of course, that very paperwork heavy, a lot of the work that you both do. But Teri, in relation to way things are going now with your experience with Stepwatch and the translation from clinic-based management into remote-based management, can you give us any anecdotes of how you're experiencing that transition in perhaps some of the companies that you sell your product to or companies that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I'm seeing like the biggest drive in the use of our product in clinical care, a bit in inpatient care, trying to focus on getting their mobility up to healthy levels while they're in the hospital. And in a way that it's really easy for the clinician to see their progress and very goal-oriented, for the patients. I'm also seeing a lot of growth in physical therapy where, they do the physical therapy in the clinic, but then really would love to see how they're improving, at home, And what's really neat with our product is that there's over like 500 journal articles with it. And in that you can find, like, for your specific type of patient, what should their walking goal be for what kind of activities they want to do, I think that's pretty special because then you get a direct relationship between their walking and some clinically relevant outcome, and I think that's great. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your questions. If I didn't, hit me again.
Yeah, no, that's great. And
Okay.
I know you guys are very active, of course, in research as well. And I guess to just understand, with the research work that you're seeing, are you seeing now that research is becoming more focused on data-driven outcomes and helping people, whether it's remotely or in the clinic, but likewise, just making the technology that you represent being an integrated part of their everyday care and recovery?
Yes, absolutely. We were lucky to be involved in a study that's coming out to be hopefully published relatively soon. And the intent was, understanding what is normal for various K levels, right? So that everyone can be a bit more informed when they're using Stepwatch, or walking devices to know, well, what would they need to do to be the K3, right? What kind of walking patterns would they need to replicate? And it's actually, it's kind of a beautiful thing to have that clarity. And I definitely see clinics, desiring that clarity as well as patients.
Excellent. And let's talk about referral sources then, the physicians and the doctors that you work with, Cass. Have you found that data is becoming part of their expectation, kind of like your pitch to them? How's that translating now?
Yeah, doctors are under a huge amount of pressure also, right? And so they want to feel confident with whoever that they send their patient to is going to handle it and that it's going to be taken care of and that they don't need to worry about it, right? So that's what they need. They need that confidence that their patient's going to be taken care of. And so whenever we send our notes back or whenever I talk to a physician, I will let them know, hey, we did this in this test. This showed the improvements. Or, hey, I'm a little bit concerned about this because we, ran tests or we did an insight system on them and we saw these declines, right? And so coming at them with very strong evidence and being straight to the point and very direct, hey, this is what we saw, this is what we determined, this is our game plan moving forward. It gives them that peace of mind that they need and that confidence in you to continue to send patients your way. And I think that's huge because it's building that trust in that relationship. And so I actually had a doctor say, hey, can you put the G-Walk on them and walk them in this brace and then walk them in that brace and tell me the difference? Because they're telling me, they like this brace better, but when they walk, it looks to me like they walk better in the other one. So it's very interesting. Once they know what technology you have, they'll ask for it. I've had plenty of doctors ask me to do certain tests with them. Hey, I want to see X, Y, and Z. Can you send that over to me? Yeah, sure thing. And so it's just establishing that relationship and confirming that you're going to treat their patients well and get them into a good place.
Excellent. Well, I guess we're kind of at that point now where we need to wrap up the webinar. We haven't had any further questions coming through the chat. So Teri Chou of Modus Health and Cassandra Delgado of Prosthetic Orthotic Associates, thank you both very much for joining us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, guys. And of course, this webinar will be available on our website for you to watch a recording if you want to share it with friends or colleagues. So thanks very much, everybody. It's really, really appreciated. Thank you.